Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inland Valley Art and Literature Show. We've been away for about a month because of Culturama, which was fantastic, but we're back now, and we're going to talk. We're going into a little bit of discussion of abstract expressionism before and after and all around it. And why don't we just introduce ourselves? My name is John Brantingham. I teach at Mount SAC. I run the California Imagism Gallery in Ontario.
My name's Tim Hatch. I will be teaching at Mount SAC, I think, next year. I think.
That's great.
As well as Riverside Community College and Cal State San Bernardino, and I write poetry and creative nonfiction and other stuff.
Hi, I'm Ken Johnson. I teach no more. I'm retired from teaching, which is a delightful job. I love it. And I've been writing and I taught art. And so art's kind of a second thing. I'm sort of loosely affiliated with the Sassy Museum of Art as we speak.
Hi, I'm Kate Flannery. I'm a writer and lawyer in Claremont, and I've had an ongoing love affair with art since I was about 14 years old, which is another story in itself, but I'm happy to be here.
And my name's Jeffrey Graessley. I'm a technical writer for currently a tax firm where we do research and development.
Okay, today we're coming together and we're going to take a look at some questions, and this is something very close to Ken's heart, I know. Three questions we're going to ask are centered around abstract expressionism. But the three questions are: what does art owe to society? How does abstract expressionism fill that role? And do individual artists go about this role differently? And so, Ken, you wanted to give us a little bit of background.
Yeah, the whole business about what is abstraction is a contested area to start with. And if you look at some of the expressionists, clear back there, even before the post-impressionist, J.M. Turner, for instance, was doing these landscapes and seascapes, which were very vague to the point of being abstracted. And others were doing the same thing at the time. Fast forward to the beginnings, just the bare beginnings of the 20th century. Vasily Kandinsky is often cited as being the first abstract painter. And that's wrong. He wasn't. And why he wasn't is kind of a more interesting story. There's a woman, if you could put that slide up with the Hilma van Klimt paintings. These paintings were generally considered in the art world, and this is over a new development. These are considered the first abstract paintings, and they preceded Kandinsky's by 30 years. And when you look at them, and I chose, rather than show different pictures, these are all from one series, but they're all arranged. These are her largest. And you can see by the scope of those things, she did, this series is called 10 of the Largest. And they're enormous paintings, and they're rather fanciful, interesting use of color, and there's almost an organicity to the forms involved, but none of them are specifically organic forms, nor are they attended to. Turns out Hilma van Klimt, Hilma af Klimt, she's Dutch, and she managed to do a standard portfolio of very realistic stuff like you'd expect painting in that part of the world, in that era. But then all of a sudden she took off in a new direction. She's very much a spiritualist.
Hmm.
And her idea was, in doing these paintings, we've got an earthquake going on here, folks, in Upland.
Hasn't hit us yet.
Well, it's a weird sound. Maybe it's something different. Maybe it's a big truck out on the street or something. Anyway, so these big paintings came out of her unconscious or superconscious. I don't know, depending on how you want to slice that one. But she's channeling in a specific, she's a medium for a specific spiritual person. And so this is kind of, the idea of where these came from was upsetting to the art world and the cultural world as it was then. And so she received advice by some very noted people who worked in various parts of the cultural enterprise to not show them, to hide them away. And she did. She did not show these in any large exhibit during her lifetime. And there was another issue involved, and that's the fact that she was a woman. And in the world of art, in the from time immemorial up through probably 70s or 80s, women had a real rough go at being seen and heard. And part of the reason why her work was suppressed was because it was damn good. And it presented a challenge to the male patriarchy in the gallery system. So anyway, bottom line, they didn't show a lot until after she died. She also wrote in her will that her paintings not be shown for 20 years after her death, because the world wasn't ready for them.
That's interesting.
So this is like 30 years before the first acknowledged abstract painter, who is Kandinsky. Okay, so we have then the number of people after that is large, and primarily male, and we get increasingly abstract stuff. But these, I just wanted you to see. This stuff is 30. These precede most what you'll read in most art books about the history of art. These precede anything there by 30 years, and I think that's notable. These were taken. This photograph was taken in the Guggenheim had a big show, and you know the Guggenheim is that large spiral building, and you walk down the staircase and you go past, and the building was nearly full of Von Klimt stuff. It was just a staggering show, and it's very hip and very trendy now to acknowledge her work. So I want you to know that I'm hip and trendy. Okay, let's see the next one.
Okay, just remember this is an audio program. So if you'd like to look at this, her last name is
I'm sorry.
AF space KLINT, and she's all over the internet.
Yeah, Clint is a town where she comes from. It's not her last name, but evidently she was the only Hilma from there. These are big flashy paintings with broad, bold colors and very dynamic. But then the next guy who got into that didn't follow the same kind of conceptual direction, and that's Pollock. Could we go to Pollock's painting?
Are we not looking at it now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't want to talk forever, but I thought just a little background would be good. This is Pollock's Grade Rainbow, and the Grade Rainbow is a very large piece. It's tall as well as wide, and this was one of the first he did when he was moved into his new painting quarters in New York where he took over a barn and he would roll these giant canvases out and paint directly on them on the floor. He would splash and drip, and the question is that just a gimmick? And a lot of the abstract expressionists were accused of having developed gimmicks so that they could wow the galleries and be seen. And the answer, I think, is no. He had a real specific reason why he was painting this way. He wasn't painting with his head, and he was hardly painting with his feelings. He painted turning over the whole process to his body. So the concept is action painting, and a number have done that. I've got a couple things that I wrote for another project. One is about Hilma, and then the next is about this particular painting, Great Rainbow. And we might get to that in a minute, but right now, the thing is the size and the physicality and the just sheer in your face bigness of his work, and the fact that it's an all over composition. It doesn't have you can't follow the line of composition through it. It doesn't try and deceive you into seeing it as three-dimensional. It just is what it is. And he would paint in walking around the canvas and paint from all sides, and he'd throw it, and he'd sometimes toss stuff in it, leaves and sticks and old paintbrushes sometimes. And so when you stand in a museum and you get up close, they are a whole different experience. So he painted in the early 50s. And so Hilma van Clint is not considered an abstract expressionist. Pollock is. Around the 40s and 50s, abstract expressionism as a specific school of painting developed, and that was that moved the center of focus from Europe, which was ravaged by war, used to be the art center of the Western world. A lot of them came fleeing the war to New York, and New York became the center of the Western art world. So here it is. The next one is the Rothko. So this is his paintings also were big. They're probably 8 to 10 feet high. And this one is broad, and Rothko is known for these massive fields of color. And people look at him and say there's nothing going on, and you just have to look harder. There's a great deal going on. This one, I do want to read what I wrote for this. Is the title of it is Orange, Red, Yellow, 1961. And I wrote a letter to Rothko, even though he's dead. I said, that day that I sat down on the bench in the exhibit hall, suddenly you were there. Whatever you had planned when you painted the last layer, what you meant by hued nuance and texture, the undercoats and surface, you had me by force. You painted to overwhelm, like the medieval stained glass panels set in clean, spacious darkness, a planned conversion by scope. No one can sit in the presence of your color expanse and still remain unmoved. Tragedy, ecstasy, torment, exaltation all play out in that quiet glow. Yet it's your edges that most have me enthralled. Whatever you intend for your color fields, whatever meaning I project, your edges tell a different story. Like many visitors, I stand and come closer, standing 1 foot away from an 8 foot tall painting, so close I can still smell the oil. and another transmission occurs. Between the vast entities that tell color stories, between the reds and the yellows and the dark violets, a liminal space develops, a lively in-between conversation. Your edges contain their own invitations and pull deftly from me hidden secrets, scarcely known to myself. The reason I wanted to do that was because with many of the abstract expressionists, because they are non-objective, because they don't have objects as we are used to seeing them in the world to relate to one another, the feeling is that there's nothing specific to hang one's hat on in looking at them. But they're emotional experiences and they're deeply projective. Rothko was known for spending probably as much time in his psychiatrist's office as he did in his studio. He was exploring the depths, he was plumbing the depths of his own psyche, and that's where this stuff came from. They're about emotion. They're not about things. They're not about objects. They're not even about thoughts. They're about feelings. They're about spirituality. And that's important to know about abstract expressionism generally. Okay, so Rothko and Pollock and those guys sort of faded out after the 60s. What took their place, and this is why we kind of have to take a step back and look at it. We got to talk about post-abstract expressionism in order to understand the point of expressionism. And that's because the whole movement towards postmodernism came in with like a wrecking ball, literally. It came in and it contested everything that was taken for granted in the art world. The primacy of galleries and critics, the whole point of making these massive decorations when we should be doing philosophy. We should be doing social critique. This is kind of what the movement in Europe during the First World War had created the Da movement. The artists there were sitting around watching their friends go off to the trenches and saying, what the hell are we supposed to be doing here? You know, decorating the walls of the arms factory owners who are making millions off our friend's death. Is no, we should be critiquing society, not decorating it. And that's kind of played out with the work of the modernists and then what followed the modernists. There are abstract expressionists still working, and they're not working in the vacuum, the almost solipsistic vacuum that the modernist abstract expressionists worked in. They work within a social context, and it's called neo-expressionism. And neo-expressionists, there's various kinds, one of which is they're called relationalists, and they came from a French art critic, Brouillard, who said, look, it's not, artists can't work alone. They work in direct contact with their society. And I did bring one other piece to show, and that's the Bill Moore's piece. You know Bill Moore, most of us know him in Pomona. The piece I'm showing is it's a very abstract piece. There are shapes in it. It's not like color fields, but there's also incredible texture and yes.
Can you give the name of it so people can look it up online?
Yeah.
The soft
Hang
closing
on.
of the day?
Hang on, I can do this. I
Uh,
don't have it. I don't have it written down.
I have it right here.
Oh, what's the name of it?
The soft closing of the day.
Thank you. And so we have what could be considered a sun that's setting, or it could be a billion other things. There seems to be a horizon line, but that's a matter of conjecture. There's a black square. Maybe it's a building. Maybe it's a portal into the next life. We don't know. But this thing together hangs as a very wonderful piece. But that's not the point of it. The point isn't to make something that looks good on a wall. That misses the point of Bill and what he's about. The relational art is art that is typically abstract in nature, but it serves a relational purpose. That's the main point of it. So if we take a couple other people, one would be Anselm Kiefer, who's German. Most of his stuff is abstract. It's also big. Kiefer grew up, he's about the same age I am. He grew up at the end of the Second World War, and he grew up in the post-war environment, and all his work explores the concept of what's Germany now? Where are we as a nation? Now that we've found out our dark side, it's been trotted out for the world to see. Now that we've been laid waste economically, what do we have left? Our mythos, the very thing we structure ourselves as a nation, has been seen to be a ludicrous endeavor, which ended catapulting us into the Second World War. He spent 40 years as an artist playing out different themes that came up and exploring this concept of where are we as a people. Another artist, this one up in Oregon, a friend of mine, Wes Hurd. Wesley Hurd is a brilliant abstract artist, but his work, he's essentially a theologian. His work takes place in a particular community. Now, the community in question got hit by a school shooting, which just was devastating for it. He painted this set of large paintings, 9 large paintings out of his own grief. And a friend who's a composer pulled together and said, look, I want to write a musical score to accompany your pieces. And they did it, and they put together this community gathering after the shooting. And here's these paintings that are exploring the grief process. And here's this music that's very provincial French, in that it's sounds like Scottish music with lots of pipes and fiddle and a lot of keening instruments. And so we all gathered this as a group, people from the surrounding community, and we listened to him talk about his painting process, and the composer talk about the background of the music. And we heard the concert, and we watched the paintings. And it was all about, what do we do when we as a community have been shattered? And so the artwork, while abstract, served a clear social purpose of attempting to heal after this devastating event in the community. Bill Moore doesn't work at that level. He works at an individual level, and it's not about seeing the pretty paintings. It's going and standing with him and looking at him, and he enters into dialogue with it. It's not about converting you or trying to preach a particular theology or anything like that. It's about, he's more interested in what you have to say in reaction to what he painted. And so here's Kiefer working on a national level. Here's Wes Hurd working on a community level. Here's Father Bill Moore working on an individual level. The common denominator is that they all are doing relational work. And that's where the abstract expressionist work has gone since the postmodern critique.
So then we get to the question. The question is, what does art owe to society, and how does abstract expressionism fill that role? Why don't we just take that, maybe get everybody in on this.
Yeah.
What do you all think that art owes to society, or does it? What do you think?
I don't think art. Sorry, I just jumped right in like
Please.
like an arrogant dick. But I don't think that art. I don't think it owes anything, but it can't help but have a relationship to society. I mean, it's always. I think there's. Nina Simone said that's the point for her. That was the point of art, was to reflect the times that you live in. Well, Ken's story earlier talking about art, it's not our job to decorate society, it's our job to critique society. That was specifically set during that era. But I mean, I think that's kind of in my humble opinion, I think that's going to, ultimately, I think that should be answered by each artist, but for themselves. But regardless of what it owes society, I mean, it can't help but have some kind of relationship, whether it's adversarial or otherwise. It feels adversarial to me anyway. Maybe that's my own. I'm bringing my own baggage to other people's work too, but a lot of it feels adversarial.
By its nature, it is part of society, right? I mean, it's a social act, right?
Yeah.
Then maybe that adversarial sort of nature, that pushing against sort of thing, is part of what art is meant to do. Right. Let's.
If I could jump in too, I would say the only thing it's really owed is the notion of being genuine, at least to oneself as the artist, meaning that I'm not putting on airs to impress. I am being genuine to myself to convey whatever form of truth, I hold. And that's the thing, like Tim and I were talking earlier about the artist or the author, in case of like a story we're critiquing, they are in charge of all of this. If a character isn't working, you pull it out. You don't make sure it stays in and then write around it while ignoring some glaring problem with it just because you love that character so much. It's Jar Jar Binks. It's every character that everybody hates. And I think art, visual art like this, is kind of cool because every piece of it, I feel, has so much more meaning than what 45 pages of a text of a larger 500 page novel could really mean, where every brushstroke is counted, where the edges that displayed the changes of a color could tell more of a story than what those 45 pages of text could. I really appreciate that stuff because all of it feels genuine. And I think there's no room to not be genuine with visual art like this.
I'm gonna jump in and sort of be a devil's advocate here.
Oh, cool.
Are we somehow being elitist in our view of artists? In other words, they have to speak the truth. They have to reflect society. They have to be philosophical. They have to critique. They also have to make a living. And so I'm wondering if we're being just a little bit too, maybe elitist is too harsh, but I know a lot of artists out there, and by that term I include visual artists, musicians, writers, who are confronting every day the need to, pay bills and appeal to the marketplace to sell their work. And are we saying that they're not artists?
Well, we've got a great example here. Jeffrey is both a poet and a technical writer. Do you draw a distinction between those two things?
100%. But I do it only in the capacity of what project I'm currently working on, because I can't make myself stop knowing the things I know about technical writing and let that influence my ability to write a poem. But I have to, of course, separate them based on projects, which I like what Kate just said, because yes, an artist has to feed themselves. If I was being judged as an artist based on the technical narratives I write for the work I do to feed myself, I'd be devastated. Like, I am so much more. But I do that because I love my family, my dogs love eating. It just works out best if I go to work. But that doesn't stop me from writing poems in the morning. I just think, and I hate to like smash anyone's dreams. Like, that's such bullshit. The only thing you really need to do is change your expectations as an artist. If your expectation is to like walk into Walgreens and see there's a Tim Hatch, there's the latest Tim Hatch right there at the kiosk, then yeah, dude, I'm here to smash dreams. But really, I just want to align expectations. Dude, this lady, I'm so infatuated with Hilma af Klint, I think. She's amazing. She's an artist and a mystic. Like, I just briefly did a cursory look at her Wikipedia, and she is a very interesting cat, to say the least. Um, she had to pay the bills somehow, and if she didn't want her art to be seen for 20 years, I don't know. Uh, um, Ken had said that there was like a portfolio, and she had a typical or traditional work, but anyhow, I'm just saying everybody has to feed themselves, and if you still want to be an artist after you fed yourself, then God bless you.
I also feel like it's very, without trying to be funny or self-deprecating, I probably am elitist a lot of the time.
Me too.
But I mean, I also think that it's I don't know, like, look at John Sayles, I think that's his name. He's a director and a writer of some amazing movies over the last several decades, but early on in his career, he wrote just absolute crap. I mean, he's the guy who wrote like the Giant Octopus Attacks movie so that he could then fund his independent films that no one had any interest in funding. So like, I'm not gonna, kind of like Jeff was saying, I would never judge John Sayles for his Attack of the Giant Octopus movies.
Ed Harris did that so he could make the Jackson Pollock movie.
Yeah, he did. Although I God knows I don't know what he made in order to fund it, but I'm sure it was part of a deal he made with some studio. Yeah, it's a great movie, by the way.
Yeah. It seems like we're creating a dichotomy. We're saying that there is art that can feed you and say interesting things, and and that can't say interesting things. And then there's the art that you don't get paid for that does say interesting things. Is that a false dichotomy?
Can we separate between content creation and art?
Okay.
Because like I'm writing essentially documents that get read by an IRS agent.
Mm-hmm.
He has probably no appreciation for art, but I love what I do, so I'm going to have some art in there, but I will never call it that.
I don't know. The cleanness of technical writing is a beautiful thing.
Yeah,
it's an extraordinary thing, and the fact that somebody who has no interest in writing outside of this one context likes it and appreciates it and can get through it smoothly.
I would argue, as someone who used to poorly write, who used to poorly program, really poorly, I would argue that there is an art to elegant code. Mm-hmm. So is it a false dichotomy? I think, yeah, probably. But I mean, there's also a point at which I'm not qualified personally to make that. I can look at the Attack of the Giant Octopus, and then I can look at Men with Guns, and I can say which one of those is art, and I feel very confident making that distinction. And I would probably I'd be willing to argue that with anyone except John Sayles. But, I don't know, what makes elegant code? Well, I mean, it probably depends on which programming language we're talking about. And I know I know a little bit of Java, and that's about it. And I know some internet stuff, HTML. That's not really programming. So I mean, I don't know. Is it a false distinction? Yeah, I imagine. And I imagine, Jeff, I imagine there is art injected into your technical writing, and maybe that IRS agent totally appreciates art and doesn't care about his job at all. Or maybe it's the other way around or whatever. I don't know. But
Well,
I think there's a point at which you can't necessarily see the art injected into something that pays the bills for someone.
I was just gonna say that, like, I just learned today that Kate is a lawyer. Is that correct?
And I do tax work, so I like your story.
Very cool. I think that's super cool what you do. And I was just gonna say, I bet at some point, or you yourself, I don't know what type of lawyer you were with, like trial or corporate or whatever, but you probably developed a process to handle your workload. And like any process, there's efficiencies. And when you get really good at doing anything, your efficiency goes really high. And I always, because I have that technical bent, I I see there an artistic flow to that, much like a watch. You open up a watch, it's very beautiful to watch momentarily because of how intricate it is.
I speaking as someone who has a Swiss person as a son-in-law, and I mean they are really oddly attuned, let's say, to watches, and it's a Swiss thing, and I can't quite explain it, but it has something to do with what you're talking about. Yeah, I think it sounds like we're sort of sniffing around the edges of maybe a distinction between art and craft, which is always a distinction which is always sort of, I liked it, but it also puzzled me because you talk about, craftsmen, people who have re-engaged with ancient arts of stone cutting or wood cutting or all of those things. And are they craftspeople or are they artists or what are they? So I think some of these distinctions and dichotomies help us understand things, but I think they can also be confusing at times.
You think they get wrapped up with social class?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, maybe we should come back to a question that Ken started to answer, which is, okay, so we're thinking about these ideas of what does art owe to society, if it owes anything, then how then does abstract expressionism fit into that role?
Let me take an initial shot at that, because we talk about, there's some distinctions, when Kate made the distinction between art and craft. I think you could also make a distinction between art and artistry. And so I know that when I wrote books to assist therapists in working with clients who suffered from PTSD, that I had to write things in a way that didn't obscure the techniques, nor did it obscure the complexity of that which they were treating, but still made enough clear sense that it was informative. And so I would balance different factors in doing it. And I don't know, Jeff, maybe this relates to what you do, but I would have to make, I'd have to write clearly. I'd have to write in a way that was engaging and capture people's imaginations as well as their hearts. But to do it in a way that helped them deliver a technically appropriate intervention.
Yeah.
And so I think what I did is I was writing, I wasn't doing art, but I was writing with artistry. That's where I'm going with this. And then, so that takes me to that question of owing to society. And I think that is a moral question. It's not an art question.
Mm.
And it's not even a practical question. It's about morality. As an artist, I do stuff that for various reasons, but there are moral implications with what I do. If I talk about writing a story, and I have to deal with this because I've got these stories that are interesting as hell, but they can be damaging to the reader, right? And I think that what I have to do, instead of making something as sensational as possible, my job is to make it interesting, but safe to read, and not just throw it out there and say, hey, if they want to eat it up, go for it. But I have a moral obligation to my readers, not to trash them.
So it goes beyond just truth telling. It's
Yeah.
also making sure that you're not opening the world up to greater evil.
Yeah, and it's a do no harm thing. So I think there are moral implications to our artwork.
I really
And-
struggle with that really deeply. Just want to throw that out there.
Also,
Also,
Because morality is very subjective, and I'm thinking of like Degas. He's depicting ballerinas as, you know, little children who are in a sense sex slaves and being so horribly mistreated, and the only limelight they'll ever see is this one instance of me breaking convention of what's okay to show, and I'm going to hit you in the face with how harsh reality could be. So if I'm obligated to always wear kid gloves when I'm discussing something that I'm upset enough to risk persecution or being outright, you know, removed from the conversation, my contribution can no longer be relevant. If I'm pushed to that point, I think there's who am I to say what the moral line is? And yes, I think some of the most moving things are the most painful, and like I understand the push to like be very sensitive to the way people feel and how they identify, and I think that's all very important to make sure that people can learn, because like in order to learn about anything you need to first feel safe. I totally get all that. But art is the thing that I feel gets used to teach. It is not the teaching instrument itself. And what I mean by that is we often like will like Tim has an assignment where he makes his students form their opinions and then find information that counters their opinions, and they're forced to identify and hold things that they disagree with and talk about them. I think that's what good art does. It gets people like us in a room discussing what the various elements of it could be, and it's then it's kind of then removed, like the artist is kind of gets removed from it, and we're able to just see it for what it is rather than the moral implications of it existing in the first place.
But Jeff, I hear you saying two things at once.
Okay.
I hear you bringing up Degas, for instance, and saying, okay, so the guy paints these romanticized versions of little girls and sexualizes them. And then
That's not no that's not what happened. They are being sexualized already. He is
Right.
showing the world that this is happening, and it's probably against the greater the druthers of the people who don't want to be exposed for having this fetish. It's morally wrong to do so, but I think it's actually right to do so. So see how morality can change.
you're saying that by exposing this truth, that he might offend sensibilities,
Right.
but he's doing it for a larger purpose, and that's to protect those people
Yeah.
who are being abused.
They'd call it consequentialism. He's engaged in consequentialism.
Exactly. So if he was to do it in such a way that just decorated this foul process, that you'd call that working less than morally, that he's making money by decorating some foul business practice that sexualizes young girls. And
If-
so what you're saying is that by doing that, by painting those things, which kind of confront us with our own dispositions / practices, whatever, that's a moral act. And I'm saying, yeah, you and I are on the same page in that.
okay.
So I'm saying that you know, and I don't think art owes anything to society, but I think artists do because they're human beings and they're acting in society.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but like if we were, I know in 5-10 years, maybe sooner, we're collectively in for some horrifying revelations about what's been going on in our borders over the last several years. Inevitably, there will be movies, there will be books, and in both cases, there will be fiction and nonfiction versions. So for whatever the fictionalized versions of what's going on in these detention centers, which is the nicest possible way to label those. If the movie is too slavishly faithful to what's actually happening, at what point does it go, I guess, at what point does it transition from sort of being holding up a mirror to reveal ourselves to ourselves to just exploitative? Because you don't want it to be exploitative. Well, I would hope no one would want to exploit the memory of what is happening currently. But I mean, at some point, I mean, there's an entire, I'm related to people who think that what's going on there is no big deal. And if they knew what was happening, they would be horrified to the point of tears and God knows what else. And so you want to hold up, you want to make that ugly, you want to make it brutal, but at what point is that going too far?
Too far in what direction? I don't understand.
Well, I mean, at what point is it too brutal? Because as you said, you don't want to traumatize the reader or the viewer or whatever. Or maybe you want to traumatize them up to a point, to the point of awareness and not to the point of just, mind-shattering horror. I don't know.
Isn't that where the art comes in? And that is that the artist makes a choice. Is he going to or she going to show something very graphically and basically smack us all in the face with it?
Mm-hmm.
Or is the artist going to portray it in such a way that the effect on our souls is deeper, is more devastated, not because of anything that was portrayed graphically, but because of the implications. And I mean, we deal with that as writers all the time. It's
Mm-hmm.
you're much more effective, and there's more art in what you do when you don't just smack people in the face.
Well, you know what? This is the distinction between art and pornography, and it can be a sexual pornography or a pornography of violence or whatever. And I think there's you look at something like Schindler's List. That's not pornography. It's really going to the very depths of what it is, of how painful movie making can be. But it's not in any way pornographic. It's not just there to show like kind of indulge us in our,
like a whole swath of horror movies from the last 10, 15, 20 years, which are just torture porn. I'm thinking of like Hostel or what, which by the way, I've never watched. So maybe I'm mischaracterizing Hostel. But or like the Saw movies, they all just seem like torture porn to me, which I can't even.
I'm so glad I don't even know what you're talking about there, Tim.
I'm envious.
Successfully sheltered myself from all of this gratuitous awfulness.
I have starting about 15 years ago, I saw something, I won't even go into what it was, but I saw something on the internet that was early video, pre-YouTube, and it was so horrifying that it permanently destroyed my ability to watch horror. I can't watch it.
You're talking to a person here who walked out of this movie, this classic movie called The Towering Inferno. It is the only movie I have ever walked out of because I couldn't handle the slow-mo spinning, flaming bodies that were, I knew, going to plunge out of a window. I thought, there's no reason I need to see this.
No, I grew up. I saw that as a kid, so I was like unaffected by it. I was too young to be, but I will say it's a terrible movie. I don't.
Yeah.
You win there too. Good job walking out of it.
It's the only
Tim, you're probably like me. We watched it, but we were too young to know who the celebrities were or why we should care about.
I was just Well, I was like, there's a lot of drama in those old disaster movies that is utterly uninteresting. Like when you're 5 and watching that, you're like, where's the fucking Godzilla? Where's the monster? Or is there no monster? Because I'm out. If that's the case, this is all the boring parts of Godzilla.
So okay, so yeah, we've got a discussion now of what's the difference between art and pornography, and I think that gets to the heart of what as Ken would say, the artist owes society. Which is kind of what I love about abstract expressionism. There's no way to have porno implications to an abstract expressionist face. I mean, I suppose there could be. I don't know. No, but I don't think anything's gratuitous in it. I mean, it's just. It is what it is. There's something pure about it.
That's a really interesting point.
And I think that's what Father Bill was all about when he would invite people into his studio and they'd have this conversation, because he knew that and he wanted to know what each person could draw from his work. And I think part of that came from his work as an artist, but part of it came from his work as a priest. I think he was definitely concerned about the soul to soul relationship that goes on between the artist and the person who looks at the art.
I've said a few times that I would have stayed in the church had I known Bill, probably. Yeah. He was an interesting guy. Okay, so I don't know I think we've already covered the last question pretty well. Do individual artists go about this role differently? And I think the answer is almost has to be yes.
Inevitably.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I personally want to come back to one thing, and that is that in any moral conversation, we end up with a possibility of what we might call mixed motives or mixed values or mixed intent, where you've got multiple demands on you morally. I mean, you run into that in teaching all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. If you're a teacher, sometimes you got to sacrifice the individual for the group. If you're a teacher, sometimes you have to sacrifice the whole damn class for the administration, or else that structure will fall. It's not as often as they make it. They try and claim, but the point is that we have settings where we have to make moral decisions about what we do, and as artists, we're kind of in that. The pornography distinction is a great one. It's a caricature, and it says, look, we have to explore what we're doing. A, we got to feed ourselves and our family. B, and we have a moral responsibility to do that. B, if I put out something that we might call pornography, it will have a negative effect on people out there. But if I can find a way to make the cognitive or spiritual transformation possible out of a close look at something that's uncomfortable, then that may be the higher goal in here. So we have to re-examine our motives. Are we going to go Kantian and say there's absolute things that we shouldn't touch? Or are we going to get more utilitarian about it and say, do we have, which action here will result in the most good or the least bad as a result of what we do? Just because individual artists have a moral stake in what they do doesn't make it necessarily a simple decision.
Mhm.
And Kate, that speaks to your point of, do we address a major underlying issue of justice, or do we not do it because somebody's feelings might be hurt in looking at it? You know, and that sort of depends on whether we get gratuitous or not.
Yeah, and I know Ken and I had this conversation about something I was writing at one point, and I was very concerned about the effect of what I was writing on two people that I care about. And we had about a 20-minute long discussion just along those lines, which was, well, why are we doing it? Are we doing it, because we want to create some harm or some hurt, or we want to speak the truth? Or is there something larger that can be learned from putting these words down on paper in a certain way? And maybe the bad effect that I thought might result from putting those words down on paper, couldn't that be a good result? But then I have to look at those words and I have to make sure I'm choosing them in such a way that I'm testing my own motives in writing it.
It's a very difficult thing to do when you're that close to it.
Yep.
That's
Yeah, I've
kind of
had trouble with my stories about some of the incidents that I've been involved in, and long range reconnaissance patrol activity north of the DMZ that resulted in brutality. And do I write about it where it curls your hair to read it? Do I ignore it, in which case it doesn't get addressed?
Mhm.
And so it's a back and forth.
Yeah,
kind of-
and the interesting kind of quicksand that you can run into sometimes is the fact that there's a test in the law for the various mistakes you can make in writing, at least. And the question is, can you be sued for libel or slander, or invasion of privacy is another one. And one of the tests that's used in the courtroom is, does a person who's accusing you of invading their privacy, do they recognize themselves? And that's scary, because if you're writing about somebody or some character who's a little wiggy, they might see themselves in something you write and you had never any intention of writing that. So it can get very, very tricky.
I mean, I think of the movie Diner.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter what era you grew up in. I think all of us can name like 6 people in our lives that are like those people in that movie. So how do we can,
Yeah.
that's a scary thing. It's
Mhm.
easy to recognize yourself in someone's writing, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, this is a great conversation. I don't think it's done. I think we maybe continue it next week and
Okay.
maybe move on from abstract expressionism to ourselves and writers, which is kind of where we were moving in the first place.
I don't know if we can talk about ourselves for an hour.
And
All right. Thank you. And we'll see you next week in the Inland Valley Art and Literature Show.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Yep.